The lawyer's voice echoed in that room like a church bell at a funeral. Upon her passing, Margaret Holloway leaves the family mansion and all its furnishings to her granddaughter, Clara. The air went still. Then, like water simmering to a boil, whispers rose from every corner. My aunts leaned closer to each other, cousins smirked, and I saw the grin spread across my sister's face. Clara sat there, polished like a magazine cover, one manicured hand pressed dramatically to her chest. "Oh my God," she breathed, though her eyes shone with something less holy. Triumph and me, I was invisible. The lawyer flipped the page, his tone flattening. "To her other granddaughter, Rachel," a pause long enough to slice me open. "Nothing further is specified." Silence fell. Heads turned, some of pity, some of judgment. My own parents didn't even meet my gaze. My mother tugged at her pearls as though the necklace had become too tight, and my father stared down at his folded hands. I sat frozen, the blood rushing in my ears louder than the lawyer's next words. My heart thudded with humiliation so sharp I felt it in my throat. I could hear the scrape of a cousin's chair as she leaned to whisper, "Imagine getting nothing." Another chuckled under his breath. Clara looked right at me across that polished oak table, lips curving in a smirk. "Sorry, sis," she mouthed, though there was not a shred of sorrow in her. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand and tell them all what it had cost me, what I had given, what I had carried. But my body would not move. I sat there, 32 years old, with the weight of a lifetime pressing on me like a stone. My name is Rachel Holloway, and for as long as I can remember, I have been the shadow in my own family's story. When Clara and I were children, my parents made sure everyone knew who the star was. She was the baby with golden curls, the one relatives fought to hold at reunions. I was the quieter one, hair always a little messy, hand-me-down dresses a size too big. When we lined up for family pictures, Clara was in the center, beaming like the sun. I was tucked to the side, told to smile bigger, while my father adjusted Clara's bow. By 12, Clara had her own bedroom painted lavender with matching curtains. I slept in the small room off the kitchen, where the smell of grease and onions clung to my clothes. "Clara's our princess," my mother would say, brushing my sister's hair until it shone. Then she'd glance at me, "Rachel, you're the strong one. You don't need spoiling." At 16, Clara was handed a shiny new car with a red bow, parked in the driveway for neighbors to admire. I got a bus schedule. At 18, when college letters arrived, my parents cashed out bonds for Clara's tuition. For me, I scrubbed tables at the diner and begged for extra shifts. Every semester, while Clara breezed through sorority life, I fell asleep over textbooks in the break room, smelling of fried chicken. Each slight was small enough to dismiss, but stacked together they built a mountain I carried alone. I told myself it was fine. I told myself one day hard work would pay off. But sitting there in that lawyer's office, the mansion given to Clara like a crown, I realized something. No matter what I did, my family never saw me. The rest of the will reading blurred. Names and bequests swirled around me like voices underwater. Jewelry to an aunt, stocks to an uncle, china sets and savings bonds distributed with neat efficiency. But all I could feel was the heat crawling up my neck, the laughter barely muffled at my expense. When the session ended, people milled about with polite chatter, congratulating Clara as if she had earned it. She accepted their praise like a queen receiving homage, cheeks flushed with the thrill of victory. I slipped out before anyone could corner me. The afternoon sun was bright, too bright, as I pushed through the heavy doors onto the courthouse steps. My hands shook as I fumbled for my keys. The parking lot stretched before me, lined with shiny cars that sparkled like Clara's new kingdom. Mine was an old sedan with a dent in the fender and a whining engine. I slid inside, closed the door, and finally let the tears fall. Not gentle tears, but hot, furious sobs that racked my chest. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached. All those years. All the birthdays where I gave Clara my slice of cake because she wanted seconds. All the times I worked double shifts so I wouldn't have to ask my parents for help. All the moments I stayed quiet while they praised her and dismissed me. And now, the final insult, erased from Grandma's legacy, erased from the story. For Clara, a mansion. For me, nothing. I started the engine. Its groan filled the silence of my rage. As I pulled out of the lot, one thought seared through me. Steady as fire, if my family wanted me invisible, then I would show them what it means to be unseen, until the moment I chose to return. That was the day the Rachel they knew died. The day I drove away not just from the courthouse, but from the role of the shadow I had been forced to play. Some families raise daughters like flowers, tended, watered, nurtured with warmth. I was raised like a weed. Clara was born 2 years after me, and from the moment she arrived, it was like the world shifted around her. My mother used to say she was the baby who smiled on cue, and that smile bought her the world. From day one, Clara was a magnet for affection. She got the softest clothes, the room with the view, the bedtime stories that ran late into the night. Me, I got the hand-me-downs. I got the silence. I remember being 6 years old, standing in the doorway of the kitchen, watching my mother ice a cake. Clara's birthday cake. It had pink rosettes, glittering sugar crystals, and a sparkler candle in the middle. I had made the paper banner myself. I asked if I could lick the frosting spoon. "No, Rachel," she said. "This is Clara's special day." She said that a lot. Clara had more special days than anyone I've ever met. By the time we were in middle school, the differences had grown like cracks in the walls. Clara got ballet lessons, violin lessons, a puppy, and a cell phone before she even needed one. I got my first job at 13, sweeping the floors of Mr. Howell's general store after school. I wasn't jealous, not at first. I thought maybe if I worked hard enough, they'd see me. Maybe I'd earn their love, but love shouldn't come with receipts. At 16, Clara's birthday turned our driveway into a showroom. It was a Saturday. My parents had been whispering all week. I thought maybe, just maybe, they had something planned for me too. I was doing well in school. I had even helped Clara study for her math final, which she barely passed. That morning, I came downstairs to find her blindfolded, giggling, being led outside by our father. Sitting in the driveway was a silver convertible, brand new, glinting in the sun. "Surprise!" they shouted. I clapped. I smiled. I swallowed my hurt so hard it felt like a stone sinking in my chest. Later that night, I asked my mom quietly if they were planning on helping me get a car too, maybe when I turned 17. She sighed, brushing a hand over my cheek. "Rachel, you're the independent one. You've always managed on your own. Clara, she needs more help. You know that." They said that a lot, too. "You're the strong one. Clara needs more," as if strength meant I didn't bleed. When it came time for college, I didn't even bother asking. Clara got into a private university out of state. My parents drove her to the campus, helped her decorate her dorm room, and paid every dime. My dad cried when they left her there. I got into a state school nearby, took 2 jobs to cover tuition. I worked the breakfast shift at a diner and cleaned offices at night. Most days I had 6 hours of class, 8 hours of work, and 2 hours of sleep. One night I came home to find a care package on the porch. My heart fluttered, until I saw it was addressed to Clara, sent by our parents, filled with snacks, beauty products, and a little handwritten note. "Hope this makes your week brighter. Love, Mom and Dad." I stood there in the dark, holding someone else's love letter. It wasn't just the big things. It was in every corner of our life. When Clara forgot our mom's birthday, it was she's under a lot of stress. When I forgot once, just once, I was selfish. When Clara quit her 3rd job in 2 months, they said, she's still figuring herself out. When I lost 1 shift due to illness, my dad said I wasn't dependable. When Clara made a mess, I was asked to clean it. When I succeeded, Clara got the applause. My whole life was a quiet war for recognition I never won, and yet I endured. I learned how to take care of myself. I cooked my own meals, changed my own tires, filed my own taxes. While Clara coasted on charm and pity, I learned resilience by necessity. At 23, I bought my first car. Used. The backseat window didn't roll down and the radio only played static, but it was mine. At 25, I finished grad school with honors. Nobody came to the ceremony. I watched other students pose with their families, flowers in hand, while I stood alone with a diploma in a cardboard folder. I smiled anyway. I always did. Years passed. Clara became the woman who got invited to speak at charity events. Never mind, she'd never worked a full-time job. She was a lifestyle influencer, her words, not mine. She posted filtered pictures of herself in coffee shops and called it work. I had my own job by then, marketing associate at a mid-size firm. Steady, unremarkable, quiet like me. My parents still compared us, even when they pretended they didn't. One Christmas, my mom pulled me aside in the kitchen. Clara had just announced she was between apartments again. "Rachel," she said, "I know you're doing okay. Could you help Clara out with rent this month, just until she finds her feet?" I stared at her. "Mom," I said slowly, "she's had a dozen chances. I've had none." Her smile faltered. "Don't be like that. She's your sister." And I realized then, nothing I did would ever be enough. No matter how hard I worked, how quietly I endured, I would always be the one expected to give. And Clara, she would always be the one worth giving to. The night before Grandma's will was read, I sat at home with a store-bought sandwich and a bottle of cheap wine. I told myself not to expect anything, but deep down I still hoped. I hoped that maybe just once someone would see me, not as the strong one, not as the one who could take it, just as Rachel, a woman who had given everything without ever being asked what she needed in return. Clara wasted no time turning her inheritance into a spectacle. By the end of the week, she'd posted a dozen Instagram reels flaunting the mansion. The captions were pure sugar and vinegar. From grief to gratitude, Grandma's house is now my sanctuary. Turning this old gem into something worthy. Stay tuned, renovation dreams incoming. And of course, my favorite, so thankful for everything I've been given. Given, not earned, just handed. She even had the nerve to name the mansion. Holloway House, she called it, like she was some heiress on a Netflix drama. She draped her life in curated elegance and invited the world in to admire it. Meanwhile, I lived in a 2-bedroom walk-up with peeling paint in the hallway and a washing machine that shook like it was trying to escape. She hosted a family dinner 2 weeks later. Everyone was invited. Everyone, except me. I found out through a cousin's post, a shot of the marble kitchen island, wine glasses clinking, a group photo under the new crystal chandelier. Everyone smiling. Even my parents. Especially my parents. I stared at that photo like it was a window into a world I didn't belong to, my own blood celebrating on land I'd walked as a child, a place that should have held my memories too. The next morning, my mother called, not to apologize, no, to ask if I might consider helping Clara with some of the renovation costs. "Just a little," she said breezily. "She's taken on such a big responsibility, and you're doing fine, aren't you?" Fine. I was behind on 2 utility bills, juggling freelance work on weekends to make rent, and living off frozen dumplings and caffeine. My heater rattled like it had a smoker's cough, but sure, I was doing fine. I tried to laugh it off, tried to bury the hurt under layers of pride, but it clung to me. The knowledge that no matter how much I struggled, my family would only see me as the one who could afford to give, because they never bothered to see how hard I fought to survive. Clara, on the other hand, played the part of the overwhelmed, elegant debutante. "Oh, Ratch is always so good with money," she'd told someone at Grandma's funeral, loud enough for me to hear. "She's basically frugal to a fault. I mean, some of us like to live a little." That was her way, digging with a smile. The worst part wasn't Clara, it was watching everyone else believe her. My brother Daniel, who hadn't called me in months, suddenly texted. Hey, can you spot Clara $500 for her landscaping invoice? She'll pay you back. My cousin Nina cornered me at a family barbecue. You should be proud of her. Not everyone could handle a property like that. Handle it. She was hemorrhaging Grandma's legacy on custom light fixtures and imported marble. They never saw the nights I lay awake wondering how I'd stretch my last paycheck through the end of the month. They didn't see me choosing between groceries and car repairs. But they saw Clara's manicured life, her soft smile, her pastel captions, and mistook it for grace. One afternoon, I came home to find a notice on my door. Rent increase. Again. My landlord, a man who treated maintenance requests like gossip, had decided to hike prices with no warning. I sat on my lumpy couch and stared at that paper until the sun set. The kitchen faucet still leaked. The oven made the entire apartment smell like metal when it preheated. And somewhere across town, Clara was probably posing in front of the new stained glass window she just had installed to honor Grandma's spiritual side. Funny how I never saw Grandma at church. I broke the next week. Not with a scream, not with a meltdown. It was smaller than that. A quiet moment that snapped something in me for good. I was at the grocery store, holding a carton of eggs. I had $15 to last me the week, and I was calculating eggs, bread, maybe some rice. And then I heard them. Two of my cousins in the next aisle, they hadn't seen me. She's just bitter, one said. I mean, if I got nothing, I'd be pissed too, the other laughed. But Rachel's always been a little cold, you know. I heard she didn't even congratulate Clara. Their voices faded as they turned the corner. I stood there, gripping the eggs so hard I thought the shell might crack through the carton. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just stopped. Stopped pretending it didn't hurt. Stopped convincing myself it would get better. Stopped waiting for my family to see me. That night, I opened my laptop and pulled up every saved pay stub, every invoice, every receipt from my freelance jobs. I made a plan not to get back at them. Not yet. But to get out of this cycle, out of their narrative, out of the shadow I'd been trained to live in. It started with small things. Saying no more often, refusing to pick up the phone when they called asking for favors, cutting off casual conversations that turned into pity sessions. They noticed. My mother texted, "You're being distant. Don't punish us for what Grandma decided." But she didn't ask how I was. She never did. None of them did. I looked around my apartment one morning, worn walls, cracked floor tiles, a desk cluttered with bills, and whispered to myself, I've had enough. It didn't feel like rage. It felt like clarity. That was the moment my story changed. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to survive for them. I was going to survive in spite of them. And I didn't know it then, but the universe was about to give me one hell of a chance to do just that. It happened on a Tuesday. The sky outside was bruised with rain clouds, and I was on my lunch break, sitting in my car because I couldn't afford to eat out anymore. I was halfway through a cold turkey sandwich when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but something, call it instinct, call it timing, made me answer. Hello, a pause, then a voice, low and precise. Miss Holloway, this is Grant Delaney. I was your grandmother's estate attorney. My chest tightened. The name was familiar. He'd been the one who read the will, the one who barely glanced in my direction when he said I got nothing. Yes, I said carefully. I need to speak with you, privately. That word, privately, it dropped like a stone in the quiet of my car. About what? I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he said, Are you free to come to my office today? It's important. I hesitated. Does this have to do with the will? A beat. It does. And Miss Holloway, please don't mention this conversation to your parents or your sister. An hour later, I was sitting in a high-backed leather chair in his office, still damp from the rain. The building was upscale, marble floors, fresh orchids at the reception desk. I felt out of place in my thrift store slacks and rain-frizzed hair. Mr. Delaney came in, all tailored suit and reading glasses. He looked older than I remembered, gray at the temples, skin like paper, but his voice was steady. "Thank you for coming, Rachel," he said, motioning for me to sit. I crossed my arms, not out of defiance, but because I didn't know where else to put the weight I was carrying. "You said it was important." He nodded, opened a thin black folder on his desk, and slid a single envelope toward me. My name was written across it. In my grandmother's handwriting. Not Rachel Holloway, just Rachel. I stared at it, suddenly unsure if I even wanted to open it. "What is this?" I asked. "A letter," he said. "From your grandmother, dated 6 months before her death. She instructed that it only be given to you privately after the public will was read." My hands trembled as I lifted the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, 2 pages long. The ink was faded slightly at the edges, the cursive elegant but firm, just like her voice. I read it once, then again, and then I just sat there. "Rachel," it began, "if you're reading this, then you already know I gave the mansion to Clara. I imagine you're hurt, maybe furious. You have every right to be, but I need you to understand something. It was never about the house. It was about the story." She went on to say how, in her final years, she'd watched our family from a distance. The favoritism. The manipulation. The way I was used and dismissed like some second draft no one ever finished editing. "You were always the one they leaned on, the one they overlooked. I saw it clearly, even when I said nothing." And then, the line that made my breath hitch. "I want you to know I did not forget you. The others got a performance. But you get the truth." Mr. Delaney watched me gently as I lowered the letter. "There's more," he said. "Your grandmother owned a private property in Vermont, a cottage about an acre of land, fully paid, not mentioned in the public will." I blinked. "Why?" "She didn't want your sister to contest it. Legally, it's in a private trust. You're the sole beneficiary." He paused. "She left instructions to give you this folder as well." He handed me a thick file. Inside were documents, ownership titles, bank accounts tied to a trust, a savings account in my name with 5 years' worth of deposits. I could hardly speak. "She said you'd understand why," Mr. Delaney said quietly. "She didn't want applause. She wanted you to have something no one could touch." I stared down at the paper. My name was there, over and over. My name on deeds, on checks, on decisions made in secret. My grandmother had seen me. Really seen me. Not the strong one, not the backup, just Rachel. Something shifted inside me. It wasn't joy, not yet. It was something quieter. Like a seed finally catching light. I walked out of that office different than I'd walked in. Not taller, not louder, but steadier. I stopped by a diner on the way home. Ordered a hot meal I didn't have to justify. Sat alone in a booth and read her letter one more time. My phone buzzed halfway through. A text from Clara. "Can you Venmo me $200? The plumber's charging extra and I'm kinda tapped out." I didn't answer. I folded the letter, tucked it carefully into my purse, and finished my coffee. That night, I walked around my tiny apartment like it was a museum I was finally leaving behind. I opened drawers, closed boxes, stared at the water-stained ceiling like I was saying goodbye. Because I knew something they didn't. I had power now. Not just money, not just land, but truth. My grandmother left me more than property. She gave me proof that I had mattered, even if no one else had ever said it aloud. I didn't tell a soul. Not yet. I let Clara keep posting about her renovations, let my parents keep calling her their miracle girl. Let the cousins keep whispering. Let them laugh. Let them believe the story they wrote, one where I was the poor sister who got nothing. Because the next chapter was mine to write, and I wasn't done sharpening the pen. A week after that first phone call, I was back in Mr. Delaney's office. This time not as the forgotten granddaughter, but as the quiet heir no one saw coming. It was raining again. The same cold drizzle that had followed me the day the will was read. But this time, the storm didn't feel like a metaphor for how I'd been treated. It felt like a curtain being pulled open. I stepped into his office with a new kind of silence, one that wasn't rooted in shame, but in intention. Mr. Delaney stood to greet me, no longer formal, no longer distant. "Rachel," he said warmly, gesturing to a seat. Are you ready? I nodded. Let's see what she left me. He opened a dark leather briefcase and began to lay things out on the table. Deeds, trust papers, bank account statements, and then wrapped in cream-colored ribbon, another letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. Rachel, it read, if you're holding this, it means the others have taken what they believe is the full measure of my legacy. But you and I both know the truth is rarely dressed in diamonds. I read slowly, my fingers shaking around the paper. I watched the years take their toll on you, the way you held your head up when no one clapped, the way you handed over pieces of yourself just to keep the peace. I'm ashamed I didn't intervene sooner. But I knew Clara, and I knew your parents. If I'd left things openly, they would have swallowed you whole trying to take what little you had left. So I waited, I planned, I protected. This is yours, Rachel, not just the property, not just the account, but the piece I know you were never allowed to feel. I had to stop halfway through and press the back of my hand to my mouth. Because for the first time in my entire life, someone in my family had chosen me. The folder held everything. A lakeside cottage in Vermont. Paid off. Beautifully maintained by a quiet groundskeeper Grandma had trusted for years. A private account she'd been depositing into monthly, 5 years of savings, investment dividends, quiet compound interest. The total made me blink. It wasn't millions, no, but it was freedom. It was rent I'd never have to stress over again. A reliable car. The ability to sleep without my body buzzing with financial fear. And perhaps more than anything, it was proof. Proof that I wasn't invisible, that I'd been worth protecting, even if no one else had seen it. Mr. Delaney let me sit there in silence for a long while. When I finally looked up, he said gently, "She started working on this plan a year before her death. Quietly transferred assets, met with me in secret. She was determined that what she left you couldn't be contested or taken." I let that settle into my bones like warm tea. A woman who had seemed so aloof in her final years had, in fact, been watching everything. All the birthdays I spent alone. All the times I bit my tongue when Clara paraded her victories. All the moments I stayed silent in the face of blatant cruelty. And she'd remembered. Not with words, with action. "Do they know about any of this?" I asked, finally. Mr. Delaney shook his head. "No, everything was placed in a sealed trust with private disbursement clauses. It won't appear in probate, and no one else is named." My shoulders dropped with something close to relief. It wasn't about hiding. It was about healing in peace. That night, I drove to the address on the deed. Vermont was quiet in early spring. The trees still bare, but hints of green promising something brighter. When I pulled up to the cottage, I had to stop the car and sit still for a moment. It looked like something out of a dream. Wooden beams, aged stone chimney, a little porch swing with peeling white paint, and just beyond the trees, a glimpse of water. The lake was still, dark and glassy like it was holding secrets. And there, standing by the front steps, was a man in his 60s with a weathered face and kind eyes. "You must be Rachel," he said. "Your grandmother said you might come." His name was Walter, the caretaker. He'd looked after the cottage for years, but only visited once a month. "She said you'd need a place like this someday," he told me. "Somewhere they couldn't touch." I nodded, throat thick. I didn't go inside right away. I sat on the porch and watched the light fade behind the trees. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to defend my silence. I stayed the weekend. Didn't tell anyone where I was. I walked through every room, wooden floors. A stone fireplace, a loft with a window that faced the lake. The bed was made, linens fresh. In the kitchen, I found a teapot I remembered from when I was a child, the one Grandma used to serve chamomile from. She'd brought it here. For me, I journaled. I made plans. I opened the bank app and saw my name above a balance that made my chest loosen. Not because it was extravagant, but because it meant I could breathe. No more begging the universe for scraps. No more handouts offered with strings attached. No more humiliating favors disguised as family support. I didn't call Clara, didn't call my parents. Let them believe what they wanted to believe. Let them keep their version of the story where I was the poor, bitter sister who'd been left out because I was rewriting the ending. I took a notebook and began outlining what came next, a job that paid me what I was worth, a new place to live, a timeline to sell my apartment lease, a list of people I no longer owed explanations to, and at the very bottom of the page I wrote one sentence, "Wait for the right moment," because my story wasn't over. Justice wasn't loud, not yet, but it was on its way. Clara called it the event of the season. Gold-trimmed invitations, black tie optional, catered from the most expensive restaurant in town. A housewarming party for a house she didn't pay for, my grandmother's house. Holloway House, she named it, as if the name alone gave her legacy, as if bricks and chandeliers could erase what she'd stolen through smiles, manipulation, and the comfort of always being chosen. I wasn't invited. Of course I wasn't, but I was coming anyway. Walter helped me pick out what to wear, something clean, classic, powerful. A navy blue blazer over a cream dress. No sparkle, no attempt to dazzle, just sharp lines and dignity. He looked me over and said, "You're not going to start a war, are you?" I smiled. "No, I'm going to end one." The mansion glowed like a wedding cake as I pulled into the circular drive. Expensive cars lined the sides, valet attendants guiding guests under the portico. Laughter spilled from the tall French doors. Music floated through the air like a spell. I stepped inside and every pair of eyes turned. The room didn't fall silent, but it tilted. Conversations slowed. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Clara spotted me from across the room. She looked radiant, curated in a sequined dress, hair curled like a television anchor. Her smile froze in place. Then she glided over like a hostess greeting an unwelcome Yelp reviewer. "Well," she said, tone syrupy, "I didn't expect you." "Clearly," I replied. "Did you come to see what you missed out on?" she said louder so the guests nearby could hear. A few chuckled, dutiful hyenas waiting on their queen. "I came," I said, "because Grandma left unfinished business." Her eyes flickered, just for a second, then she laughed, tossed her hair, and waved her champagne glass. "Oh, Rachel, always so dramatic. You do love an audience, don't you?" I didn't respond, because just then the front door opened again. And Grant Delaney walked in. He wore the same navy suit from the will reading, but this time his presence had weight. A hush spread like ink in water. People shifted, whispered. Clara's smile wavered. "Mr. Delaney," she said, stepping forward. "I didn't know you were coming. Was there some mistake?" He didn't answer her. He walked directly to me and nodded once. Then he turned to the room and spoke clearly. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption, but I've been asked to deliver an amendment to the Holloway estate distribution, one that was executed privately and has just reached its release date." The room shifted again. Clara's eyes snapped to mine. "What is this?" she hissed. Delaney pulled a sealed envelope from his briefcase and held it aloft. "A trust, privately established by Margaret Holloway. It supersedes the terms of the public will under specific conditions which have now been met." Clara stepped back. Her skin had lost its glow. "I don't understand," she said. "I already own the house. The deed." "The deed is provisional," Delaney said calmly. "Your grandmother tied it to a 1-year financial stewardship clause. Overspending, deferred taxes, or attempted sale would trigger a reversal." Murmurs rose around the room. Clara looked like a candle with the flame blown out. "Trigger a reversal," she repeated, voice brittle. Delaney opened a file and read aloud. "Clause 4C. If the beneficiary of Holloway House exhibits fiscal irresponsibility or leverages the property for profit or vanity within the first 12 months, said property shall revert to the secondary heir, Rachel Holloway, who will then assume full rights." You could hear a pin drop. Someone gasped. I didn't look to see who. Clara stared at the lawyer like he'd just accused her of murder. "This is absurd." "I've renovated this place. I've invested." You hosted 2 paid influencer shoots, listed the property on luxury rental sites, and spent over $84,000 of inherited funds on cosmetic upgrades with no permit filings, Delaney said smoothly. All of which violates the clause. I didn't know, she cried. No one told me that was a condition. You didn't read the full document, I said softly. You never do. My parents had inched closer now. My mother's lips were thin with panic. My father looked like he'd aged 10 years in a minute. Rachel, my mother whispered. Why didn't you say anything? I turned to her and said calmly, because I wanted you to reveal who you were without knowing who I had become. Delaney turned to me next. As per your grandmother's final directive, Rachel, the house is now yours. Transfer of ownership begins Monday. Clara's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at me with something deeper than anger. Fear. Because for the first time, I wasn't the girl in the corner. I was the woman at the center of the room. I want everyone out by the weekend, I said. This is still Grandma's house, and she didn't raise it to be a stage for self-worship. No one argued. People started moving, murmuring, slipping toward the doors. My parents lingered for a moment, unsure, but I didn't stop them. Clara stood frozen, trembling with disbelief. I don't understand, she said again, her voice hoarse. She loved me. She did, I said. She just finally saw who I really was and what you'd become. Delaney gave me a respectful nod and exited. The music had stopped. The lights suddenly felt too bright. And me, I stood alone in the mansion foyer, watching the party disappear like smoke. There was no applause, no spotlight. Just the quiet satisfaction of justice, served cold, clean, and undeniable. As I stepped outside onto the marble steps, the wind lifted my hair gently off my shoulders. I looked up at the house, mine now, and whispered, "Thank you, Grandma," because she hadn't just given me a house. She'd given me the power to walk in and never walk out unseen again. The dust didn't settle immediately. Clara didn't leave quietly. That weekend, she tried everything, pleading with the lawyer, calling our parents in tears, posting vague Instagram stories about being betrayed by blood. None of it worked. By Monday morning, Mr. Delaney had filed the transfer paperwork. The mansion, every chandelier, every marble step, every echo of Grandma's voice, was legally mine. But that wasn't the real twist. The real twist came 3 days later when I returned to Mr. Delaney's office to finalize the paperwork. He greeted me with a folder already in hand, his expression unreadable. "I wasn't planning to tell you this today," he said, "but your grandmother left one final clause, one that only activates after the property transfer is complete." He slid the folder across the desk. "Grandma," I said softly, "you really didn't miss a beat, did you?" Inside the folder was a sealed document marked Final Distribution. I opened it and felt the air shift in my lungs. In addition to Holloway House, my grandmother had left me a majority share in her private investment firm. A portfolio of real estate holdings, tech stocks, and a long-forgotten lakeside property in Michigan that had recently been rezoned for commercial development. Trust accounts in my name. 2, one available immediately, the other to be unlocked at age 40. There were numbers on those pages that made my mouth go dry. This wasn't just a home. It was wealth. Legacy. Security that would outlive me. And Clara? Well, Grandma had left her a mansion. Yes, but it came with strings. The property had historical tax obligations, unpaid permits, renovations that violated zoning restrictions. Mr. Delaney explained it with all the poise of a man reading someone their own eulogy. Clara spent nearly double the allowed threshold in decorative upgrades, all personal expense, none deductible. She failed to register the property with the city's Heritage Council, which voids her renovation permit. Additionally, unpaid land taxes from the previous year, left intentionally untouched by your grandmother, now roll into Clara's liability due to her temporary possession. "How much does she owe?" I asked, not because I wanted to gloat, just to understand the scope of what Grandma had orchestrated. "Approximately $112,000, he said flatly. Due within 90 days. Clara called me that night, 3 times. I didn't answer. Then came the text. I need your help, please. You don't have to hate me. We're sisters. No apology, no ownership, just expectation, always expectation. My parents called next. They didn't yell, didn't demand. They begged. Ratch, my mother said softly. She's your only sister. You can afford to help her. I almost laughed. Because for 32 years, they had made sure I was the one without. And now, suddenly, because I had something they couldn't touch, I was supposed to become generous. I met her words with the same icy clarity Grandma must have used when she drew up the trust. I didn't ask for this, I said. I earned it. By surviving every moment you all ignored me, Grandma knew who I was, and now so do you. It spread through the family like wildfire. The girl who got nothing had gotten everything. Clara was furious, humiliated. Rumors swirled that she tried to sell her designer handbags to cover the property fines. She quietly moved out of town within the month. No more photo shoots. No more champagne toasts from the balcony. No more smug smiles from the center of the room. The queen had lost her crown. And the girl in the shadow. She walked out of it. I didn't throw a party. Didn't post online. Instead, I sat on the porch of Holloway House in the same swing Grandma used to rock in, watching the sun set over the trees. I brewed a pot of chamomile tea, poured it into a delicate porcelain cup. One Grandma always kept tucked behind glass, and sipped it slowly. Not out of celebration, but because for the first time in my life, I could finally exhale. I made changes. Donated some of Grandma's jewelry to a local women's shelter. Turned one of the guest rooms into a creative workspace for local teenage girls. Reopened her scholarship fund under a new name, the Rachel Grace Fund. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoration. About rewriting a legacy not built on favoritism, but fairness. At Thanksgiving, I invited the entire family. Some came, most didn't. Clara didn't respond. My mother arrived late and sat stiffly at the far end of the table. My father avoided my eyes, but the food was warm, the air was calm, and the house, my house, was finally filled with the kind of peace Grandma must have dreamed of when she chose me. After dessert, my mother lingered in the kitchen. She placed a hand on the marble counter, eyes scanning the walls she once called too much for Rachel. I never thought it'd be you who stayed here, she said quietly. I placed a hand on the kettle and replied, I did, and I didn't say it to be cruel. I said it because it was true. I had always been the one standing in the wings, but Grandma had handed me the pen and I had written my ending in permanent ink. They say justice is loud, but I've learned it's quiet. It walks on steady feet. It doesn't arrive with applause, it just arrives, and when it does, it stays. There was a time, far too long, when I measured my worth in how my family saw me. If they praised me, I felt whole. If they ignored me, I felt invisible. If they loved Clara louder, I assumed I had to be quieter. I spent decades in that silence. A good daughter. A strong sister. A woman who never asked for more than scraps, but not anymore. I no longer need their invitations. Their smiles. Their approval. Because the truth is, I've built a life that doesn't require permission. I stayed in Holloway House, not for revenge, but for restoration. For every year I watched Clara twirl in the center of the room while I stood on the edge, I now walk the hallways with ease. I replaced her designer mirrors with framed photographs, black and white images of my grandmother smiling in her garden, holding a teacup with chipped edges, standing at the lake in Vermont in a windbreaker and boots. She didn't care for polish. She cared for peace, and I carry her in every corner of this home. I kept my job for a while, out of habit more than need. But eventually I resigned. Not in a blaze of glory, just a quiet letter and a thank you for the years of experience. Now I run my own business. A small creative studio built in the back wing of the mansion, formerly Clara's content lounge. Now it's a space filled with natural light, quiet music, and the sound of young women laughing as they build things, designs, dreams, futures. I use the trust funds not to flaunt, but to build. To create something that never existed in my childhood, a space where girls who have been overlooked feel seen. And I changed my number. Not because I'm hiding, but because I no longer wait by the phone. If my family wants to reach me, they'll have to come with something more honest than guilt or gossip. Some do, eventually. My aunt sent a handwritten note apologizing for not seeing sooner. My cousin Nina showed up at my door last month with a pie and a long, nervous hug. Even my father sent a letter, brief, typed, but signed with shaking pen strokes that told me more than the words did. But Clara, she's gone quiet. The last I heard, she was living in a small condo 3 towns over, working as a consultant, trying to rebuild her brand. She's no longer the face of the family. Because the family stopped looking at her like a star. And I stopped looking for her shadow. Peace isn't loud. It's waking up in a house that smells like fresh coffee and open windows. It's walking barefoot across wooden floors that creak with memory, not burden. It's hosting Sunday brunch for friends who don't ask who got what in a will, only how I'm doing now. It's hearing my name, just my name, and knowing it's enough. There's a tree in the back garden that blooms late. Grandma planted it when I was 10. She used to tell me, not everything blossoms on time, but when it does, it holds. She was right. I was late to everything, late to being seen, late to being chosen. Late to realizing I didn't need them to crown me to be worth something, but when I bloomed, I held. Sometimes I walk through the house in silence and imagine her beside me. She was always watching, I tell myself. She just waited for the right moment. And that moment was everything. The neighbors know me now, not as Clara's sister, not as the other Holloway girl. They know me as Rachel, the woman who keeps her porch light on, the one who rebuilt her legacy out of shadows and silence, the one who doesn't flinch anymore when someone says, "You're so composed." Because it's not composure, it's knowing who I am, finally. Fully, I visit the Vermont cottage once a month. Walter keeps it clean. The lake still glistens like a sheet of glass. I sit by the fire with a book Grandma left behind, her favorite, dog-eared and underlined. There's a passage she marked 3 times. We are not what we inherit. We are what we choose to become in its absence. I like to think she underlined it for me. I'll never forget the way Clara looked at me in that room, shocked, unraveling, certain the world had betrayed her. But it wasn't betrayal, it was justice. Clean, sharp, unmistakable, and when it landed heavy, but I didn't gloat. I didn't need to because Grandma had already said what mattered. I didn't forget you. And that one sentence stitched together everything I had tried to carry alone. So no, I don't want their apologies or their envy. Or their late-stage recognition. What I have now is better. A home, a voice, a future. And a truth I'll carry forever. Justice was served, but most importantly, I finally found peace. Now tell me this, have you ever been overlooked, only to later prove your worth? I want to hear your story. Drop it in the comments below because your voice matters here.